Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. So this video is slightly delayed by an explosion. Um, so these parts of the video are being filmed post-explosion, thus the enormous bandage and the bandages on the head. None of the wounds are serious. They're just gross looking and need to be covered so that they aren't going to bleed all over if I bump them against something. So no worries there. Now, what is a mouse gun? Now, today, if you Google mouse guns, you will see a bunch of guns like the Ruger LCP and the SIG P238 380. And these are very small guns, but they're not this small. This is one of the original mouse guns, the Browning Baby, and it is absolutely itty-bitty. Now, most mouse guns were in calibers 22 or 25, ranging from 22 short, 22 long, and 22 long rifle, mostly 22 short. And they were supplanted early in the 20th century, in the first decades of the 20th century, by guns like this, which are in 25 ACP. Before we get into the weeds, I'd like to rented lips. I'd like to take a moment to thank my supporters on Patreon. This is very much a shoestring operation, and your contributions help more than you know. Also like to thank channel benefactors, those individuals and businesses who have contributed to the channel in innumerable ways and really help make this work. Also, shout out to Rain City Shooting Center for continuing to provide material support to the channel. So, on with the mouse guns. Now, the term mouse gun originally is derisive and means to imply that they're only really suitable for shooting mice because of their tiny caliber, 22 short to 25 ACP. 25 ACP was designed specifically to be used in tiny semi-automatic pistols because John Browning felt that the shape of and construction of rimfire ammunition of the period did not lend itself well to small semi-automatic pistols. And he wasn't wrong. Also, rimfires are somewhat less reliable than centerfires. So, thus the 25 ACP cartridge, which is a tiny little cartridge. Actually, it is the smallest centerfire cartridge currently in production. There was a 2.7 millimeter and a 4.5 millimeter cartridge that were smaller and were centerfire, but those weren't really viable in any sense, producing only a few foot-pounds of energy and very little penetration. More of a novelty than a legitimate option for self-defense, even though they were sold as such. So the pejorative term mouse guns, referring to their very low power, and there's some truth to that. These are not good at stopping people. At least not angry people bent on hurting you, because it doesn't help you if the person dies of sepsis 3 days later if they've already worked their evil will upon you. Now, they can and did work. It's really weird because sometimes somebody will soak up a full magazine of 25 ACP without even slowing down, and sometimes a single shot to the heart will drop them like a poleaxe steer. It is extremely unreliable. However, they were effective in the sense that most criminals are really not interested in getting shot. So once the gunfire starts, regardless of what the gun is, they tend to run away. I don't really like to count on that. I consider these a substitute for not having a gun rather than a substitute for a more powerful pistol. But, being as it may, I love the guns. I like things that are small and clever. And mouse guns are definitely small and clever. And while they have a reputation for being inaccurate, they are not, in fact, inaccurate. They're just very, very difficult to shoot accurately because of their very small size makes it hard to grip them. And the sights are, if present at all, tend to be pretty rudimentary. But they're fun, and they're neat, and they're interesting. And I have amassed a small collection of them. some of which I'm going to show you today, more of the standout examples. And for the interests of brevity and perhaps my sanity, I am going to omit derringers and single shot and double shot derringers. I don't have that many of them, and really they should be handled separately. Now, the whole mouse gun thing started in the late 19th century. The Belgians were great knockers off of the bulldog revolvers, which were typically in larger calibers like 44 and 45. But there was a need for smaller concealed carry guns, and they made them also in 38 and 32. But towards the end of the century, they started making miniature versions of bulldog revolvers, typically with folding triggers, that were absolutely tiny. And they were typically chambered in 22 short and were practically useless. These were followed on quickly by the Velodog revolvers, which were a little bigger, mostly because the cartridge was the length of 22 Magnum, and it wasn't any more powerful than a 22 long rifle. But the longer casing allowed you to do things like fire rubber bullets or wooden bullets or loads of black pepper, because their intent, as the Velodog implies, was to discourage the apparent plague of feral dogs around Paris from chasing and attacking bicyclists, who were not keen on killing them, so they had these less lethal options in addition to solid lead bullets. And these were often pressed into pocket duty for self-defense in a more general sense. Now, with the turn of the 20th century, there were still large numbers of small 22 caliber revolvers being produced and variations of the Velodog, which were sometimes in centerfire calibers, but usually not. And then with the John Browning patenting and selling to FN and Colt a vest pocket model, the popularity of these guns took off. The vest pocket was widely knocked off in places like Spain and Belgium, and other designs were introduced. And it's kind of fascinating. So, let's go to the extended tabletop and have a look at some representative examples from my personal collection with a notable cameo appearance by my daughter-in-law's gun. As I mentioned, in the interests of brevity and perhaps my sanity, I have omitted single shot and double shot derringers, and the focus here is on 20th century guns. So there are a few omissions, but this is for the most part it. And we're starting with the Harrington and Richardson Victor revolver, because it is 20th century. This is a double action, single action revolver in 22 rim fire, which means it will fire short or long cartridges, but long rifles protrude from the front of the cylinder, so it won't chamber them, and they'd probably blow it up. Modern 22 short and 22 long can be quite a bit more powerful. So on the advice of a former H&R factory repair tech, I only shoot CB longs through this gun. The trigger pull is horrible. The rear sight is non-existent. This groove is not a rear sight. That's where the firing pin goes. Kind of goes through the frame. There is a front sight, and this gun is not, by any means, easy to shoot accurately. And to unload it, you have to press this lever, pull the cylinder access pin, and use it to, after you've removed the cylinder, to knock the empty cartridges out. Afterwards, you can replace the cylinder and then load it through this loading port with it on partial, the safety notch cock. And the cylinder does lock when the gun is not being fired. And it's very tiny, very low powered, and they were very inexpensive. But this one is in fantastic condition, given that it was made around the turn of the century. It is in really remarkable shape. And this is the sort of thing that someone would buy to drop in a pocket when they went bar hopping on a Saturday night. So in a sense, it is a Saturday night special. The next offering is also a revolver. These are made by A. Francotti between 1912 and 1914. And it is chambered in, of all things, 25 ACP. And it too is in a remarkable state of preservation, other than the mother of pearl grips, which are kind of notoriously fragile. It has a relatively short, pretty light double action trigger pull. And of course, there is no provision to cock the hammer. Technically, it has sights, and I am almost sure that they bear some relation to the point of impact. To take this one, to load or unload this one, you have to pull the barrel off and then use, again, the cylinder axis to poke the empties out. And it is a 5-shot 25 ACP. It's kind of hard to do looking through a camera. My iPhone. Okay, and there we are reassembled. And this is very light, very small, very compact. My wife bought it for me as a birthday present after I was perusing Gunbroker and sent her a picture of it saying, "Is this not the most adorable gun you have ever seen?" And she agreed that it was and said, "Hey, your birthday's coming up. Do you want it?" And of course, I said yes. It is, again, not easy to shoot with any level of accuracy. And it really lives up to the mouse gun reputation of being a gun for bad breath distances. This gun is in the mouse gun category by virtue of its caliber more than its size. It is chambered for 25 ACP. It is a Mauser 6.35 millimeter. It is commonly nowadays called the Model 1910, which terminology Mauser never used, but 1910 was the first catalog it appeared into. And this is, as near as I can tell, the second iteration. And it is quite a bit bigger than all the other guns here, which makes it very shootable, and it's very accurate. The sights are not fabulous, but they are not nearly as bad as on a lot of mouse guns. And it has this interesting safety where you push the lever down to engage safety and press the button to disengage it. And it is quite capable of producing good rapid fire groups at 7 yards. But it is a mouse gun only by courtesy of its cartridge. This is the Lignos Einhand, so called because it is able to be operated with one hand. Einhand, German for one hand, because the front of the trigger guard is a non-reciprocating charging handle. So you could carry this with a loaded magazine and no round chambered, and then chamber a round by pulling back on the trigger guard and then moving to the trigger, preferably after removing the safety. And it's a very interesting gun, very neat. It's an interesting concept that I'm kind of surprised hasn't been more widely adopted. This is a Spanish, one of many Spanish knockoffs of the 1908 Colt, or Colt Vest Pocket. They have omitted the grip safety to make it cheaper to produce. And this is the Spanish Protector. And they were cheap guns. And this one I got for next to nothing. And yet it works very well. It takes a Colt magazine, although it's not labeled Colt, it's a knockoff of the Colt magazine. And these guns were imported by the maker of the next gun to be sold in mainland Europe. And he decided to go into his own business, making this, the Dusek Duo, which later became known as the CZ Duo after the nationalization of the Czechoslovakian firearms industry. And it too uses a Colt magazine. Again, not produced by Colt. But it is a much nicer pistol with better fit and finish. It's a much nicer pistol than the Spanish knockoffs that it basically replaced. And in World War II, the Nazis took over the factory in Czechoslovakia, and F. Dusak told them to do something impolite to themselves and refused to have anything to do with it. So these were produced during the Nazi occupation for the Nazis, which was interesting because they came in a cute little flap holster that kept an extra magazine and a cleaning rod. And they were bought by Nazi officers. The dubious utility doesn't really come into question because how powerful does a gun need to be to shoot kneeling prisoners in the back of the head? Gotta love those Nazis. But it's a very nice little gun. And despite having basically no sights, there's just a groove down the top, not even a pretense of sights. It's actually remarkably easy to produce decent groups at 7 yards with care. Next up is the Browning Baby. This is the smallest semi-automatic pistol you can carry when you can't carry a gun. Okay, yes, there were a couple of novelty pistols in 2.7 and 4.5 millimeter that were smaller than this, but those aren't real guns. Even though they were sold for self-defense. And this is Browning's idea, or rather Browning's successor's idea, of a replacement for the vest pocket, which was produced as the Colt 1908 and by FN. And it uses a superior safety system, has a 6-round magazine, very similar to the Colt magazine, and it is tiny. Hard to do this on camera. And despite being basically the smallest viable semi-automatic pistol, I can actually shoot this and shoot it pretty well and produce quite decent groups, even firing quickly at 7 yards. And it does have sights. And saying that they are better than most mouse guns is damning them with faint praise because it is not a high bar. But that's the Browning Baby. Then we come to a gun that is interesting mostly because it was probably James Bond's first gun in the novels before he was forced to switch to a .32 caliber PPK. This is the Beretta Model 418, and it is an 8-shot, 25 ACP. It's slim and small, but it is still relatively easy to grip. I can get a finger and a half on it. Most of these I can only get one finger on the grip. And again, it has good sights for a mouse gun, which means the sights are terrible. And it's an interesting gun. It's proved to be very reliable. It has a grip safety, which is interesting, in addition to the standard safety / takedown lever. And there's a lot to like here. Now, Ian Fleming had James Bond make some very bizarre modifications to the gun, like shortening the barrel by 1/10 of an inch, apparently, and removing the front sight, because James Bond was a fictional character and he could hit anything the author needed him to hit. But it is an interesting piece of history, and it's actually a very good little gun. It's very nice. And the next gun is also a Beretta. This is the Model 950 that was produced as the Jetfire in 25 ACP and the Minx in 22 short, which is what this one is. And the button release for the magazine. And it shoots 22 short. Its party trick, of course, is the tip-up barrel, which allows you to load a round and then insert a magazine, and you're ready to go after you cock the hammer. The original guns did not have a safety, but that was added later. And another neat little gun, and 22 short from this gun is surprisingly effective, in terms at least of penetrating ballistics gel. I would not consider it, I would consider it possibly the one of the few worse choices than 25 ACP for a gun of this type, but it would actually do the job if shots were placed judiciously. Mostly it's just a neat gun. It's fun to shoot. Next is the Mercury, which I originally called the Robar Mercury because Robar was the importer. And this is made by Melior in Belgium. And it's an interesting gun in that it has an actual sleeve to cover the recoil spring because otherwise it would be exposed through the ejection port. And this is a standard, very typical striker-fired gun. Most of these are striker-fired. The safety is interesting because it's like it takes itself off. You get it started and it clicks open. And it has a Beretta style magazine release button on the palm. And these magazines, which are the downfall of the gun because they tend to split at the front and then they don't want to load cartridges properly. There is also some kind of issue with the ejector because frequently, especially when the magazine is full, it likes to stuff a cartridge up in here rather than ejecting it. So I think there is a design flaw in the breech face. But still, it's an interesting and neat gun. And unlike most guns of its ilk, it takes down because there is a screw bushing here that you unscrew that allows the recoil spring to come loose. And then you can lift the slide off. But neat little gun, just not at all reliable. I just did a video about this. This is a Rig Army 25 Auto, very similar to the Galisi and a number of others of its ilk and vintage, which would have been the 1950s and 60s. And it's a neat little gun. And it had some issues initially when I tried to fire it that mostly seemed to have been related to it not having been cleaned. I also had to repair one of the grips because it had become wayward and apply some oil to get it to function properly. But it's a cool little gun. I find it very curvy and elegant looking. Pretty neat stuff. And again, very similar to the Galisi and 4 other guns manufactured by different people under the Rig Army name. I have no explanation for that. Then we have the Smith & Wesson Model 61-2 Escort, which I take as proof positive that there was no mandatory drug testing at Smith & Wesson in the late 60s and early 70s. I suspect it was designed by people who don't remember the 60s. After the Gun Control Act of 1968, you couldn't import small pocket pistols anymore. So Smith & Wesson decided to fill the gap in the market by cribbing the design of an obscure Belgian pistol from 1908, the Piper Bayard. And this is 22 long rifle. It has a 5-round magazine, a rather nice safety, and the barrel is at the bottom with the recoil spring at the top. And the ergonomics are weird. And unlike most of the guns here, which are striker fired, this is a single action auto with an internal hammer. And it has really good sights for a mouse gun. And the thing that stands out to me about this is that it is hilariously accurate. I've shot palm-sized groups at 20 yards with this. And at 7-yard rapid fire, it's just a dawdle. But you only get 5 shots, so I suppose it's important that you be able to place them well. The ejection port, of course, on the side next to the barrel, so it kind of kicks the rounds out right onto your trigger finger. But it's a hoot. Last, we have the newest of these, developed in the 1980s. This is the Seacamp LWS 32, and it is the only gun here that is not 22 or 25 caliber. It is in fact 32 caliber, built on the same gun that was originally introduced in 25 ACP and has identical dimensions, which means that Recoil is brutal. And they have a whole list of recommended ammunition because the magazine is the length of a 25 ACP magazine, which means there's a lot of 32 ACP ammo that just won't fit. It is double action only, a double action for every shot like a revolver. It has not even a pretense of sights because they felt it was designed to be used at bad breath distances, which I really think sells the gun short. I think with sights, it would actually be quite accurate, at least for revolver shooters who are used to the double action trigger pull. This one has been modified to tame the horrendous recoil by 20 line per inch checkering on the front strap to help keep it from shifting in your hand, and a port in the barrel, which in testing loses an average of 4 feet per second, so don't worry about it. But between the port and the checkering, it makes it much less painful for me to shoot. Now, whether or not it is painful for people to shoot depends largely on the size of their hand, and the larger the hand, the more likely it is to hurt. This one hammers, before I did the modifications, this one would hammer my trigger finger with the bottom of the trigger guard and recoil quite painfully. But it's a very cool gun. This one actually belongs to my daughter-in-law. I prepared it for her with the recoil mitigation issues. And very cool little gun. They make the same gun with exactly the same dimensions in 380 ACP, and the 32 is brutal. The 380 ACP, I can only imagine how horrible that is to fire. I hope to find out someday, but I have not yet. So, that's the, well, at least the 20th century mouse gun collection, excluding derringers and single shots. The heyday of the popularity of mouse guns ended with the Gun Control Act of 1968. It had come to the attention of politicians that it was relatively easy for poor people and minorities to purchase these guns for self-defense. And since that was felt to be undesirable, they claimed that they were favored by criminals, which was a lie. Criminals like larger, more intimidating guns, that because they're not there to shoot people, they're there to take their stuff, and tiny guns just aren't scary. So they were not, in fact, favored by criminals. But politicians, being politicians, worked their will and rendered it practically impossible to import tiny, affordable guns in small calibers. And I don't like to talk about politics on this channel, but it is what it is. You know, that's what happened. So there were efforts to take up the slack with domestic production. People like Smith & Wesson, Raven Arms, and the whole Ring of Fire companies, group of companies, continued to produce mouse guns to this day. But they're not very popular, and they were never a great option for self-defense. So they have mostly fallen by the wayside. You can still buy boutique examples of the Browning Baby, produced by PSA, and the C-Camp 32 or 380 Auto. And these do fill the role of mouse guns, of being, you know, last-ditch, point-blank self-defense. And many of the smaller guns of this ilk are popular as last-ditch backup pistols for, you know, armed agents of various types. But largely they have fallen by the wayside in favor of harder to conceal, but still pretty small guns like the Ruger LCP. So they are a largely ended chapter of history, but it's a cool field for study. And since by and large they aren't that expensive for the classic mouse guns, with notable exceptions like the Browning Baby, they're pretty easy to collect for many people. So they're still a field of interest, and I find them fascinating. But as weapons, they are severely compromised. So mostly nowadays, they're just for fun and because they're interesting. So that's it. Mouseguns on Parade draws to a close. And I hope you found this interesting and entertaining. And I hope this finds you well. Stay safe, take care, and we'll talk to you again real soon.